A tense courtroom scene with dramatic lighting. A young female lawyer, Karoline Leavitt, stands confidently at the plaintiff's table, holding a stack of papers in her hand. She has a determined expression on her face, but there's a hint of nervousness in her eyes. Across from her, Judge Harold Grayson sits behind an imposing wooden bench, leaning back in his chair with a smug smirk. His gavel rests near his right hand, and he looks condescendingly down at Karoline. The courtroom is filled with spectators, some whispering to each other while others watch intently. Reporters sit in the front row, notepads ready, capturing every detail. The atmosphere feels heavy with anticipation, as if something explosive is about to happen. Part 1, 670 words. The courtroom was quiet except for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Karoline Leavitt stood at the plaintiff's table, her fingers gripping the edge tightly. Her knuckles were white, though she tried hard not to let anyone see how nervous she felt. This was her first big case, and it wasn't just any case. It was against one of the largest corporations in Boston. The stakes were high, and everyone knew it. Across the room, Judge Harold Grayson adjusted his robe and glanced around the crowded space. He liked having a full courtroom. It made him feel important. His reputation preceded him. Everyone knew he was arrogant, often dismissive and rumored to be corrupt. But no one had ever been able to prove anything against him. Today, however, things might be different. Karoline took a deep breath and began speaking. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but she quickly found her rhythm. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge directly, "this case highlights a pattern of predatory behavior by large corporations targeting small businesses. My clients have suffered significant losses due to these unethical practices." Before she could continue, Judge Grayson interrupted her. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "do you really think this court has time for such trivial matters? Perhaps you should focus on simpler cases, like parking tickets, or maybe disputes over who gets custody of the family dog." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some people exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or cringe at the judge's blatant disrespect. Karoline felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she refused to let him get the better of her. Instead, she squared her shoulders and replied calmly, "With all due respect, Your Honor, this case affects dozens of families and their livelihoods. It deserves proper attention." Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, I'm sure it does," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "But forgive me if I find it hard to take seriously when the person presenting it seems so inexperienced." Karoline clenched her jaw but forced herself to stay composed. She reminded herself why she was here, not for herself, but for her clients. One of them, Linda Harper, sat nervously in the gallery, wringing her hands together. Linda owned a small bakery that had been struggling for months after being hit with unfair fines and regulations. If Karoline didn't win this case, Linda might lose everything she'd worked for. As Karoline prepared to respond, she noticed movement near the back of the courtroom. Alex Carter, a well-known investigative journalist, slipped into the last available seat. He carried a notebook and pen, jotting down notes furiously as he observed the scene unfolding before him. Alex had been following rumors about Judge Grayson for months, trying to uncover evidence of corruption. So far, he hadn't found anything concrete, but today's events piqued his interest more than ever. Back at the front, Karoline decided to ignore the judge's jabs and dive straight into her argument. She placed several documents onto the podium and turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady now, "what we're dealing with here isn't just a simple dispute. These corporations have systematically targeted small businesses using loopholes and illegal tactics to drive them out of the market. And they've done so with the help of certain individuals within our legal system." At this, Judge Grayson stiffened noticeably. For a moment, his usual smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease, but he quickly masked it, banging his gavel loudly. "Enough!" he barked. "Stick to the facts, Miss Leavitt, or I'll hold you in contempt." Karoline nodded, unfazed. She flipped through her notes and continued, presenting evidence of financial irregularities and suspicious connections between the defendants and local officials. Each piece of information seemed to chip away at the judge's composure, though he did his best to hide it. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered eagerly, hoping to catch wind of what was happening inside. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and questions flew thick and fast. Inside, tension mounted with every passing minute. No one knew exactly where this trial would lead, but one thing was certain: something big was brewing. For Karoline, this moment represented more than just a chance to prove herself as a lawyer. It was an opportunity to stand up for those who couldn't fight back on their own, to shine a light on injustice and demand accountability. Even if Judge Grayson tried to belittle her, she wouldn't back down. Not today. Not ever. As the hearing dragged on, Alex scribbled furiously in his notebook, sensing that he might finally have the story of a lifetime on his hands. Whatever happened next, he knew it would change everything. For Karoline, for Judge Grayson, and perhaps even for the entire city of Boston. A dramatic courtroom scene with dim lighting casting shadows across the room. Karoline Leavitt, a young and determined lawyer, stands at the podium, holding a folder of evidence. Her expression is focused but defiant as she faces Judge Harold Grayson, who sits behind his bench glaring down at her. The judge's face shows irritation mixed with a hint of unease, his hands gripping the edges of his desk. In the background, reporters scribble notes furiously while spectators lean forward in anticipation. A tense atmosphere fills the air, suggesting that something explosive is about to unfold. Part 2, 670 words. Karoline could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She knew this moment was critical, not just for her clients but for herself too. Judge Grayson's earlier insults still stung, but she pushed them aside. She couldn't afford to let him distract her. Taking another deep breath, she continued, laying out her case. "Your Honor," Karoline said, her voice clear and firm now, "these documents show illegal practices carried out by the defendants. They include emails, financial records, and internal memos proving collusion between these corporations and certain officials." She paused briefly, glancing toward the jury before turning back to the judge. "We believe this pattern of behavior has caused irreparable harm to small businesses like my client's bakery." Linda Harper sat nervously in the gallery, clutching her purse tightly. She watched Karoline with wide eyes, hoping against hope that this young lawyer could pull off a miracle. Linda had spent years building her business, only to see it crumble, under unfair fines and regulations. If Karoline lost today, there would be no second chances. Judge Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't like where this was going. For weeks, he'd assumed this trial would be an easy win for the defendants. They always were when he presided. But Karoline wasn't backing down. Worse still, she seemed prepared. Too prepared. "What nonsense is this?" the judge snapped, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Miss Leavitt, do you really expect me to believe that some random papers prove anything? This court doesn't have time for wild accusations." Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out a printed email. Holding it up for everyone to see, she said, "This email was sent by a senior executive at one of the defendant companies. It clearly outlines plans to manipulate zoning laws to force small businesses out of operation. Does that sound like nonsense to you, Your Honor?" The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped writing for a moment, their pens hovering above their notebooks. Judge Grayson's jaw tightened, and his fingers drummed impatiently on the bench. He wanted to shut her down, to dismiss her outright, but he couldn't risk looking guilty of bias. Not here, not now. Alex Carter, sitting near the back, leaned forward intently. His pen moved rapidly across the page as he jotted down every word. Something about this exchange felt different, more charged than usual. He glanced around the room, noticing how even the bailiff seemed unusually alert. Whatever was coming next, Alex knew it mattered. Karoline pressed on, undeterred by the judge's hostility. "Furthermore," she continued, "we've uncovered evidence showing improper payments made to local officials in exchange for favorable treatment. These bribes allowed the defendants to operate without consequence, leaving small businesses like Ms. Harper's at a severe disadvantage. At the mention of bribes, Judge Grayson's face darkened. He banged his gavel loudly, startling everyone in the room. "Enough!" he shouted. "I will not tolerate baseless allegations in my courtroom. Miss Leavitt, either present credible evidence or sit down." But Karoline wasn't intimidated. She placed the document back on the podium and looked directly at the judge. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm presenting more than allegations. These are facts backed by verifiable records. If you'd like, I can provide additional details right now." For a split second, Judge Grayson hesitated. There was something in Karoline's tone, a quiet confidence, that unnerved him. He hated being challenged, especially by a tense courtroom scene with dramatic lighting highlighting the key players. Karoline Leavitt stands confidently at the podium, gesturing toward a nervous-looking man sitting in the witness chair. The witness, Daniel Meyer, grips the edges of his seat, visibly uncomfortable but determined to speak. Judge Harold Grayson sits behind the bench, his face contorted in anger and frustration as he listens to the unfolding testimony. Reporters in the background scribble notes furiously, while spectators lean forward in their seats, captivated by the drama. The atmosphere is electric, filled with anticipation and suspense. Part 3, 670 words. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Karoline called her final witness to the stand. Daniel Meyer rose slowly from his seat in the gallery, adjusting his tie nervously before making his way to the witness chair. He looked like an ordinary man, average height, thinning hair, and glasses perched on his nose. But today, all eyes were on him. Karoline gave him a reassuring nod as he sat down. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," she said gently, trying to ease his nerves. "Daniel Meyer," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "I used to work as an accountant for one of the companies involved in this case." Judge Grayson leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Used to?" he interrupted sharply. "Does that mean you're no longer employed there? Perhaps fired? For incompetence?" Karoline shot the judge a disapproving glance but didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she focused on Daniel. "Can you tell us why you left your position, Mr. Meyer?" Daniel hesitated, glancing around the room. For a moment, it seemed like he might back out entirely. Then he took a deep breath and began speaking. "I discovered something troubling during my time there. Things weren't adding up in the financial reports. Large sums of money were being funneled into offshore accounts, and I couldn't figure out why. When I asked questions, I was told to keep quiet. Or else." "Or else what?" Karoline prompted softly. Daniel swallowed hard. "They hinted that if I kept digging, bad things could happen. Eventually, I realized it wasn't safe to stay. So I quit." The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Grayson seemed momentarily stunned. In the gallery, Linda Harper clasped her hands together tightly, her eyes fixed on Daniel. She had heard stories of corruption before, but hearing it straight, from someone who'd witnessed it firsthand, made it feel more real. Karoline pressed on carefully. "Did you report any of this to authorities or anyone else?" "Yes," Daniel admitted. "I tried reaching out to regulators, but nothing came of it. It felt like they were protecting the company somehow." At this, Judge Grayson slammed his gavel down hard. "Objection!" he barked, though technically he had no right to object. "This is hearsay and completely irrelevant to the matter at hand." Karoline turned to face him squarely. "Your Honor, this testimony directly supports our claims of illegal activity. If we can't present evidence like this, how can we ensure justice is served?" The judge's face reddened, and he opened his mouth to argue further, but Karoline didn't give him the chance. She addressed the jury instead. "Ladies and gentlemen, does it not concern you that whistleblowers like Mr. Meyer are silenced while corporations continue to exploit loopholes? Isn't it our duty to hold them accountable?" Her words resonated throughout the room. Spectators nodded approvingly, and even some jurors exchanged thoughtful looks. Meanwhile, Alex Carter scribbled furiously in his notebook, capturing every detail. Something about Daniel's testimony struck him as pivotal. not just for this case but potentially for exposing larger truths about corruption within the system. Back on the stand, Daniel continued recounting his experiences. There were emails. 2, he said quietly. Emails discussing bribes paid to officials in exchange for favors. I saved copies of them before leaving the company. I thought maybe someday someone would listen. Karoline smiled warmly at him. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Your courage today means a lot, not just to me but to everyone affected by these practices. As Daniel stepped down from the stand, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. Judge Grayson looked increasingly agitated, his usual smug demeanor replaced by thinly veiled panic. He banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order even though no one was speaking out of turn. Enough of this nonsense, he shouted. Miss Leavitt, unless you have concrete proof beyond these wild accusations, I suggest you wrap up your arguments immediately. But Karoline wasn't finished yet. She walked over to her table and picked up a flash drive containing the emails Daniel had mentioned. Holding it up for everyone to see, she declared, Your Honor, this contains irrefutable evidence of the crimes we've been discussing. Would you like me to submit it into the record now? For a brief moment, Judge Grayson froze. His eyes darted between Karoline and the flash drive, clearly debating his next move. Finally, he muttered, Proceed, though his tone suggested he regretted allowing it. Karoline handed the flash drive to the bailiff, who passed it along to the judge. As Grayson inserted it into his computer, his expression darkened further. Whatever he saw confirmed his worst fears. Outside the courthouse, reporters buzzed with speculation. Cameras flashed nonstop as people filed in and out during breaks. Inside, the air grew heavier with each passing minute. Everyone sensed that something monumental was about to happen. Alex Carter watched intently, piecing together the puzzle in his mind. He had suspected Judge Grayson's involvement in shady dealings for months, but now he was starting to see the bigger picture. If Karoline played her cards right, this trial could expose far more than corporate greed. It could bring down one of the most powerful figures in Boston's legal system. As the day wore on, Karoline remained steadfast, her confidence unwavering. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she had truth on her side. And sometimes truth was the most powerful weapon of all. A dramatic courtroom scene bathed in soft, tense lighting. Karoline Leavitt stands at the podium, holding a flash drive high in her hand as she addresses Judge Harold Grayson with determination. The judge sits behind his bench, visibly uneasy, his face pale and beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Reporters in the background are furiously typing on their laptops or scribbling notes, capturing every detail. Spectators lean forward, in their seats, some covering their mouths in shock while others whisper among themselves. The atmosphere is electric, filled with anticipation as the truth begins to unravel. Part 4, 670 words. The room seemed to hold its breath as Karoline stood tall, gripping the flash drive like it was a weapon. Your Honor, she said firmly, breaking the silence. This evidence proves beyond doubt that these corporations engaged in illegal activities, and they weren't working alone. There's proof linking certain officials to this scheme, including members of our own legal system. Judge Grayson's eyes darted nervously around the room. He tried to maintain his composure, but his usual arrogance had vanished. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his robe, trying to appear calm. Miss Leavitt, he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual bite. You're treading dangerous ground making such baseless accusations. Karoline didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the judge's bench, her gaze unwavering. Baseless? These emails show clear communication between the defendants and individuals within the court system. Payments were made, not just to influence decisions but to bury cases entirely. And one name keeps appearing, yours, Your Honor. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged shocked glances, and reporters scrambled to write down every word. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to handle the escalating tension. In the gallery, Linda Harper covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't expected the trial to take such a drastic turn. Beside Alex Carter leaned forward, his pen moving rapidly across the page. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Far bigger. Judge Grayson slammed his gavel hard, attempting to regain control. "That's enough," he barked, his voice shaking slightly. "I won't tolerate slander in my courtroom. Miss Leavitt, if you have any shred of decency left, you'll retract that statement immediately." But Karoline wasn't backing down. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I can't retract what's true. These emails speak for themselves. They detail bribes funneled into offshore accounts under your name. If you'd like, I can display them on the screen for everyone to see." For a moment, no one moved. The judge stared at her, his face growing redder by the second. Then, without warning, he called for a recess. "Court is adjourned for 15 minutes, he shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly until the sound echoed through the room. As people filed out, the buzz of conversation grew louder. Reporters rushed outside to update their editors, while spectators lingered near the doors, eager to discuss what they'd just witnessed. Inside, Judge Grayson retreated to his chambers, slamming the door shut behind him. Alex Carter stayed behind, watching closely. He pulled out his phone and began typing a series of tweets. His followers would eat this up. The drama unfolding in real time was unlike anything Boston had seen before. Before hitting send, he added a cryptic line. "Biggest scandal in years about to break wide open, stay tuned." Meanwhile, Karoline returned to her table where Daniel Meyer waited anxiously. "You did great," she told him sincerely. "Your testimony might be the key to bringing these people down." Daniel nodded. A dramatic courtroom scene with intense lighting focused on Judge Harold Grayson, who was being handcuffed by two stern-looking federal agents. The judge's face shows shock and humiliation as he stands beside his bench, his robe slightly disheveled. In the background, Karoline Leavitt watches calmly, her arms crossed while reporters in the gallery snap photos and take notes furiously. Spectators look on in stunned silence, some covering their mouths in disbelief. The atmosphere is charged with tension, marking a pivotal moment of justice served. Part 5, 670 words. The sound of the courtroom doors slamming open echoed like thunder. Everyone turned to see two federal agents stride in, their badges glinting, under the harsh lights. They moved with purpose, heading straight for Judge Harold Grayson. The judge froze, his eyes wide with panic as one of the agents stepped forward and addressed him. "Harold Grayson," the agent said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. "You are under arrest for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the agent recited the Miranda rights, Grayson's face turned ashen. For once, his usual smugness was nowhere to be seen. He stumbled back slightly, clutching the edge of his bench for support. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as the agents placed handcuffs around his wrists. Karoline stood at the podium, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. She had dreamed of this moment, of seeing justice served, but now that it was happening, she felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. This wasn't just a victory for her clients. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been wronged by Grayson's corrupt decisions. In the gallery, Linda Harper covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. All those months of struggling, of feeling powerless against the system, it was finally coming to an end. She glanced at Karoline, mouthing a silent, "Thank you," before breaking into quiet sobs. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Cameras flashed wildly and microphones were thrust toward the front as the agents led Grayson out of the courtroom. His head was bowed, his reputation shattered in front of everyone he'd once intimidated. Some spectators clapped softly, while others simply stared, too shocked to react. Alex Carter remained seated, watching the scene unfold with a satisfied smile. He had done his part, exposing the truth when it mattered most. Now, as he scribbled final notes in his notebook, he knew this story would make headlines for weeks. It wasn't just about Grayson, it was about the power of persistence, courage, and teamwork. Outside the courthouse, the crowd grew larger as news spread quickly. People gathered on the steps holding up signs that read, "Justice prevails and no more corruption." Reporters shouted questions at anyone leaving the building, desperate for quotes and reactions. The energy was electric, a mix of anger, relief, and hope. Back inside, the judge's arrest left an eerie quiet in the courtroom. The bailiff cleared his throat, reminding everyone that proceedings were still ongoing. But no one seemed ready to move on just yet. Even the jurors sat, frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Karoline took a deep breath and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "Today marks an important step toward accountability. What we've uncovered here isn't just about one man, it's about exposing a system that allowed such corruption to thrive. My clients deserve justice, and I believe we're closer to achieving that than ever before." Her words resonated deeply. Spectators nodded in agreement, and even the defendant's lawyers looked uneasy. It was clear that Grayson's downfall had shifted the balance of power in the room. As the hearing resumed, the focus returned to the case at hand. Without Grayson presiding, a temporary judge was appointed to oversee the remainder of the trial. The new judge wasted no time in acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "This court recognizes the seriousness of the allegations presented today," the replacement judge stated firmly. "We will ensure a fair and thorough examination of all evidence moving forward." For Karoline, these words were a small but meaningful victory. She knew the fight wasn't over, not yet, but she also knew they were on the right path. With each piece of evidence presented, the defendant's defenses crumbled further. Later that evening, after the courtroom had emptied, Karoline stayed behind to gather her papers. Alex Carter approached her cautiously, holding out a cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said with a grin. Karoline accepted it gratefully. "Thanks. Today was intense, to say the least." "You did incredible work," Alex replied sincerely. "This trial wouldn't have gone anywhere without your determination. And thanks to Daniel's bravery and your evidence, we've got enough to bring down an entire network of corruption." Karoline sighed, leaning against the table. "It's not just about me or Daniel. It's about everyone who refused to stay silent. People like Linda who trusted us to fight for them. That's what kept me going." Alex nodded, jotting down a few more notes. "Well, rest assured, this story is far from over. Once my article hits tomorrow morning, expect fireworks. The public deserves to know the full extent of what's been happening behind closed doors." As they talked, the weight of the day began to lift slightly. Karoline allowed herself a small smile, knowing they had made history together. Justice wasn't perfect, and there was still much work to be done, but today proved that it was possible, and outside, as the sun set over Boston, the city buzzed with anticipation. Tomorrow's headlines would tell the tale of a crooked judge brought to justice, a young lawyer's triumph, and the enduring power of truth. A bustling newsroom filled with reporters typing furiously on their laptops and talking on phones. Large screens in the background display headlines about Judge Harold Grayson's arrest, with phrases like "corruption exposed" and "justice served." Alex Carter sits at a cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and notebooks. He looks focused as he types on his computer, pausing occasionally to glance at printed documents containing emails and financial records. The atmosphere is tense yet energetic, capturing the urgency of breaking news. Part 6, 670 words. The next morning, Boston woke up to chaos, or at least that's how it felt for anyone following the news. Every major outlet led with the same headline: Judge Harold Grayson arrested in massive corruption scandal. Coffee shops buzzed with conversations about the trial. Television anchors dissected the details, and social media exploded with reactions. For many people, it was hard to believe that someone so powerful had been taken down so publicly. Alex Carter arrived at the office early, fueled by adrenaline and caffeine. His desk was cluttered with notes, printed emails, and screenshots of financial records. He had spent most of the night writing his article, double-checking facts and ensuring every detail was accurate. This wasn't just any story. It was the biggest scoop of his career. As he sat down to make final edits, his editor approached, holding a copy of the draft. "This is gold, Alex," she said, her eyes scanning the pages. "But are you sure we're ready to publish? Once this goes live, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," Alex replied confidently. "Everything in here is backed by evidence, emails, bank statements, witness testimonies. Even if they try to deny it, the proof is undeniable." His editor nodded, impressed. "All right then, let's get this out there. The world needs to know what's been happening right under their noses." Within minutes, the article went live online. Titled "Gavel and Greed: How One Judge Sold Out Justice," it detailed Grayson's involvement in bribery schemes, illegal payments, and cover-ups. It also highlighted Karoline Leavitt's role in exposing the truth, praising her courage and determination. Readers couldn't get enough. Shares skyrocketed, comments flooded in, and calls poured into news stations demanding answers. Meanwhile, Karoline spent the day preparing for the next phase of the trial. While Grayson's arrest had shifted public opinion, the defendants still fought back fiercely. Their lawyers argued that the evidence against them was circumstantial, attempting to cast doubt on its validity. But Karoline remained undeterred. Back at the courthouse, the temporary judge overseeing the case made it clear that justice would prevail. "This court will not tolerate attempts to obscure the truth," he announced during proceedings. "All evidence must be thoroughly examined and all parties will be held accountable." Karoline welcomed his words. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she felt more confident than ever. With Grayson out of the picture, the intimidation tactics that had once loomed over the trial were gone. Now, it was simply a matter of presenting the facts and letting the jury decide. Outside the courtroom, Linda Harper greeted Karoline warmly. "I just wanted to say thank you again," Linda said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've given me hope, not just for my bakery but for everyone who's been treated unfairly. I don't know how to repay you." Karoline smiled gently. "You don't need to repay me, Linda. Just keep fighting for what's right. That's all the thanks I need." Later that afternoon, Alex stopped by the courthouse to check in with Karoline. He found her sitting on a bench outside, sipping coffee and reviewing notes. "Looks like your name's everywhere today," he joked, sitting beside her. Karoline laughed softly. A warm and cozy interior of a small bakery, filled with the scent of fresh bread and pastries. Linda Harper, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, stands behind the counter, handing a bouquet of flowers to Karoline Leavitt. Karoline, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looks touched as she accepts the gift. The bakery is bustling with customers, some browsing shelves stocked with baked goods while others chat happily at small wooden tables. Sunlight streams through the windows, creating a cheerful and inviting atmosphere. Part 7, 670 words. Weeks passed after Judge Harold Grayson's arrest, and life began to settle into a new rhythm, for some people at least. For Linda Harper, things were finally starting to look up. Her bakery, once on the brink of collapse due to unfair fines and regulations, was thriving again. Customers streamed in daily, drawn not only by her delicious treats, but also by the story of resilience behind them. One Saturday morning, Linda decided it was time to properly thank Karoline Leavitt. She had invited the young lawyer to stop by the bakery for lunch, promising homemade lasagna and dessert. When Karoline walked in, Linda greeted her warmly, holding out a colorful bouquet of flowers. "These are for you," Linda said, her voice full of gratitude. "You've done so much for me, and for everyone else caught up in this mess, I can't thank you enough." Karoline accepted the flowers with a shy smile. "You don't have to thank me, Linda. This was never about me. It was about making sure justice prevailed, and besides, your lasagna is more than enough reward." They both laughed as Linda led her to a quiet corner table near the window. The bakery was busy, filled with the hum of conversation and the smell of freshly baked bread. Linda set down 2 plates of steaming lasagna, along with slices of her famous chocolate cake. As they ate, They talked about everything that had happened since the trial. Linda shared how business had picked up after news of the corruption scandal spread. People kept coming in to support me, she explained. They said they wanted to stand with small businesses against big corporations. It's been overwhelming, in the best way possible. Karoline nodded, happy to hear that Linda was doing well. That's amazing, Linda. You deserve every bit of success. But remember, this isn't just about one victory. It's about setting an example. If we can hold powerful people accountable, maybe others will feel brave enough to speak up too. Linda leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. Do you think things will really change? Or will it just go back to the way it was before? I think it'll take time, Karoline admitted. But every step forward matters. What happened with Grayson shows that no one is above the law. Not judges, not corporations. No one. That's progress, even if it feels small sometimes. After lunch, Alex Carter stopped by the bakery. He had been following up on leads related to the corruption scandal, uncovering connections between Grayson and other officials. His book, Gavel and Greed, was shaping up to be a bestseller, and he wanted to share updates with Karoline. Hey, stranger, Alex said with a grin as he approached their table. Mind if I join you? Not at all, Karoline replied, gesturing to an empty chair. What brings you here? I wanted to let you know what I've found so far, Alex said, pulling out his notebook. Turns out Grayson wasn't working alone. There's evidence linking him to several politicians and corporate executives. Once my article comes out next week, there's going to be another wave of investigations. Karoline listened intently, impressed by Alex's dedication. That's incredible work, Alex. You're making sure this doesn't end with just one person. That's exactly what needs to happen. Alex shrugged modestly. It's not just me. None of this would have been possible without you and Daniel. You both took huge risks, and because of that, we're exposing a system that needed shaking up. The three of them spent the afternoon chatting, sharing stories, and discussing what came next. For Karoline, it felt good to reflect on how far they'd come. When she first took on the case, she had no idea it would lead to such monumental changes. Now she realized that standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible, could make all the difference. Later that evening, as Karoline walked home, she thought about the future. Offers from prestigious law firms had poured in after the trial, but she turned them down. Instead, she decided to open her own practice, focusing on helping small businesses and individuals fight against injustice. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew it was where she belonged. Back at the bakery, Linda watched Karoline leave, feeling grateful for having met her. She returned to her work, smiling as customers complimented her cookies and pies. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better, and that was enough for now. Across town, Alex sat at his desk, typing away at his book. Each sentence brought him closer to revealing the full scope of the corruption scandal. He knew it wouldn't fix everything overnight, but shining a light on the truth was a start. Boston continued to heal, slowly but surely. The scandal had shaken trust in institutions, but it had also sparked hope. People began speaking out about injustices they'd witnessed, inspired by Karoline's bravery and Alex's determination. Justice might not always come quickly or easily, but when it did, it reminded everyone why fighting for it mattered. And for Karoline, Alex, and countless others, that fight was far from over. A bright and professional office space with large windows letting in natural sunlight. Karoline Leavitt stands near her desk, shaking hands warmly with Alex Carter. Both wear friendly smiles, symbolizing newfound respect and collaboration. On Karoline's desk sits a plaque that reads, Leavitt Legal Group, marking the start of her new practice. Behind them, shelves are lined with law books, framed certificates, and small plants, giving the room a welcoming yet professional vibe. The atmosphere feels hopeful, representing new beginnings and shared goals. Part 8. 670 words. Months had passed since Judge Harold Grayson's arrest, and the ripple effects of the scandal continued to spread across Boston. Investigations into corruption expanded beyond Grayson, uncovering ties between politicians, corporate executives, and even other judges. The city was abuzz with discussions about reform, how to rebuild trust in institutions and ensure such abuses of power never happened again. For Karoline Leavitt, the changes were personal. After turning down offers from big-name law firms, she opened her own practice, Leavitt Legal Group. Her mission was simple: to fight for justice on behalf of those who couldn't fight for themselves. She rented a modest office downtown, decorated it with care, and hired a small team of passionate lawyers eager to make a difference. On the day of her grand opening, friends, clients, and supporters gathered to celebrate. Linda Harper arrived early, bringing homemade cookies as a gift. "Congratulations, Karoline," she said warmly, hugging her tightly. "You've already changed so many lives, including mine." Karoline smiled, grateful for Linda's support. "Thank you for being here, Linda. This wouldn't have been possible without people like you believing in me." As guests mingled, sharing stories and congratulating her, Alex Carter walked in carrying a bouquet of flowers. He looked around the office, taking in the warm and inviting space. "Nice place you've got here," he said, handing her the bouquet. "Looks like you're all set to take over the world." Karoline laughed softly. "One case at a time, Alex. But thank you, I really appreciate this." They sat down together near her desk, catching up on everything that had happened since the trial. Alex's book, Gavel and Greed, had become a national bestseller, sparking conversations about accountability and transparency in government and business. Readers praised it not only for exposing corruption, but also for highlighting the courage of individuals like Karoline and Daniel Meyer. "I've been thinking," Alex began after a pause, "we should work together more often." "Oh?" Karoline raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" "Well," Alex explained, "you're out here fighting battles in court while I'm digging up dirt behind the scenes. We make a pretty good team, if I say so myself. Why, stop now. Imagine what we could accomplish if we collaborated on future projects." Karoline thought about it for a moment. It made sense. They complemented each other perfectly. While she handled legal matters, Alex could investigate deeper issues and bring attention to injustices through his writing. Together, they could amplify their impact. "I like the idea," she said finally, smiling. "Let's do it. Who knows? Maybe we'll inspire others to join the fight too." Their partnership marked the beginning of something bigger, a shared commitment to exposing corruption and advocating for change. Over the following months, they worked closely on several cases, combining Karoline's courtroom expertise with Alex's investigative skills. Their efforts led to further arrests, policy reforms, and renewed public faith in the legal system. For Karoline, running her own practice gave her a sense of purpose she'd never felt before. Every client mattered, every case was important, and every victory reminded her why she became a lawyer in the first place. Whether it was helping a struggling single parent keep their home, or challenging unfair corporate practices, she approached each situation with determination and compassion. Linda stayed in touch, often stopping by the office with fresh baked goods or updates about her bakery. Business was booming, and she credited much of her success to the publicity surrounding the trial. "People love a good underdog story," she joked during one visit. "And thanks."